Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Former Acting Attorney General Sally Yates testified to the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee Monday that she'd warned the White House less than a week into the Trump presidency that former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn was lying about whether he discussed U.S. sanctions with the Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak, and that these public and private lies made him susceptible to blackmail.
We were concerned that the American people had been misled about the underlying conduct and what General Flynn had done. And additionally, that we weren't the only ones that knew all of this, that the Russians also knew about what General Flynn had done, and the Russians also knew that General Flynn had misled the vice president and others. And that created a compromise situation, a situation where the national security advisor essentially could be blackmailed by the Russians.
Yates' testimony renewed questions about why President Trump disregarded her warning and did not oust Flynn until 18 days later, after Flynn's lies were revealed by the press. Ahead of Yates' testimony Monday, Trump launched a tweet storm, including one in which he wrote, quote, "Ask Sally Yates under oath if she knows how classified information got into the newspapers soon after she explained it to WH counsel," unquote. Some lawyers say Trump's tweet constitutes illegal witness intimidation. Former criminal investigator Seth Abramson tweeted, quote, "The president is committing a serious felony, witness tampering, in full view of the American public. What's the media going to do about it?" unquote. Also on Monday, former Obama administration officials said Obama had personally warned Trump about Flynn only days after Trump was elected. But on Monday, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer tried to shift blame onto the Obama administration, asking why it hadn't revoked Flynn's security clearance.
The question that you have to ask yourself really is, if President Obama was truly concerned about General Flynn, why didn't he suspend General Flynn's security clearance, which they had just reapproved months earlier?
Vetting for a White House official position is significantly more extensive than a security clearance, which is held by 4 million people. During Sally Yates' testimony Monday, she also clashed with Texas Senator Ted Cruz over her refusal to defend President Trump's first Muslim travel ban in a move that cost her her job. This is Yates.
And in this particular instance, particularly where we were talking about a fundamental issue of religious freedom, not the interpretation of some arcane statute, but religious freedom, it was appropriate for us to look at the intent behind the president's actions, and the intent is laid out in his statements.
Final, very brief question. In the over 200 years of the Department of Justice history, are you aware of any instance in which the Department of Justice has formally approved the legality of a policy and 3 days later the Attorney General has directed the department not to follow that policy and to defy that policy?
I'm not, but I'm also not aware of a situation where the Office of Legal Counsel was advised not to tell the Attorney General about it until after it was over.
Meanwhile, a federal appeals court in Richmond, Virginia, heard arguments over Trump's second travel ban, which sought to ban all refugees and citizens of 6 majority Muslim nations from entering the United States. The 13 panel of judges appeared to be divided over the ban, with a number of judges saying Trump's own statement showed the second travel ban still sought to unconstitutionally discriminate against people based on their religion. This is Judge Henry Floyd.
Shortly after the Executive Order 2 was signed, Sean Spicer said the principles remain the same. President Trump's statement concurrent with that time, "You know my plans." Spicer, President Trump yesterday continued to deliver on campaign promises. Is there anything other than willful blindness that would prevent us from getting behind those statements?
Another judge, Robert King, pointed out that until Monday, yesterday, Trump's campaign website had continued to call for a, quote, "total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States," unquote. The White House removed that page during Monday's hearing after facing questions from reporters. In Syria, the Assad government says the United Nations and other international groups will not be allowed to monitor the so-called de-escalation zones under a plan brokered by Russia, Iran and Turkey that took effect over the weekend. Instead, the Syrian foreign minister announced Monday the Syrian army would respond to any potential violations within these zones, which seek to become safe areas for civilians fleeing violence. Armed anti-government opposition groups have rejected the proposal, accusing the Syrian government of carrying out the majority of attacks against civilians. On Wednesday, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson will meet with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov to discuss Syria and whether the U.S. will sign on to the de-escalation zone's proposal. Meanwhile, U.S. airstrikes continue in Syria in and around Raqqa. The journalistic monitoring group Air Wars says multiple U.S.-led airstrikes on May 4th and May 5th killed between a dozen and 2 dozen Syrian civilians. In Washington, D.C., members of the Trump administration and Pentagon officials are pushing for the deployment of at least 3,000 more U.S. troops to Afghanistan and to relax restrictions on launching airstrikes there. The recommendation comes after the top U.S. commander in Afghanistan, General John Nicholson, warned the war has reached a stalemate. The United Nations says last year saw a record number of Afghan civilian deaths and displacement. President Trump's expected to decide whether to approve the deployment of additional troops later this month. There are currently about 8,400 U.S. troops in Afghanistan. In Somalia, a car bomb explosion killed at least 8 people in the capital, Mogadishu, on Monday. The militant group al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack, saying the targets were police, military, and intelligence officials. The World Health Organization says at least 25 people have died in Yemen from a cholera outbreak as the U.S.-backed Saudi-led war in Yemen continues to destroy Yemen's health and sanitation infrastructure. The United Nations has warned the ongoing war also threatens to push Yemen into famine. In Libya, the bodies of several refugees, including an infant, have washed up onto the shore as hundreds more are feared to have drowned in the Mediterranean over the weekend. This is a spokesperson from the United Nations High Commission on Refugees.
We're still trying to get more information from the people that will disembark over the coming day to see if they are survivors of this incident. But this tragically brings the total number of people dead and missing since the beginning of the year to more than 1,150.
In South Korea, voters are heading to the polls today for a special election to fill the seat of former President Park Geun-hye, who was ousted and jailed on charges of bribery, extortion, and abuse of power after massive street demonstrations in March. The front-running candidate, Moon Jae-in, has pledged to challenge the THAAD missile defense system the U.S. recently installed in South Korea. The most left-leaning candidate in the race, Sim Sang-jung, has campaigned on a platform of wealth redistribution, universal basic income, LGBT rights, and other progressive causes. In Indonesia, a court has ruled to sentence former Jakarta governor Basuki Cahayapurnama to 2 years imprisonment after being convicted of religious blasphemy. Supporters of the governor, who's also known as Ahok, gathered outside the courtroom Tuesday to protest the verdict and sentence.
We are disappointed. The law is blind. It can no longer tell between right and wrong. Ahok has sacrificed being governor, and we accepted that. Now he's innocent, yet accused of blasphemy. We are disappointed in the law in Indonesia.
Go to democracynow.org to see our full interview with journalist Alan Nairn about how associates of President Donald Trump have joined army officers and vigilante street movement linked to ISIS to orchestrate the massive street demonstrations that brought down Governor Ahok in Jakarta, Indonesia, and eventually sought to bring down the Indonesian president. In France, hundreds of activists marched to the party headquarters of President-elect Emmanuel Macron on Monday to deliver a petition signed by more than 30,000 people demanding Macron support workers' rights and progressive programs. This is activist Laurent Berthet.
Today we want to tell Emmanuel Macron that a lot of people in France didn't vote in his favor, but first and foremost against Marine Le Pen, and that he doesn't reflect our hopes for a real transition on the ecological, economic, and social level. The only thing he asks for us is his openness to Europe.
Back in the United States, the Interior Department froze all meetings and work for more than 200 advisory boards and committees last week, about a third of which were related to science. The Interior Department says the committees have been frozen until Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke can review them. The freezings come as on Friday, Environmental Protection Agency head Scott Pruitt dismissed half the members of an EPA scientific review board, including Michigan State University professor Robert Richardson, who tweeted, quote, "Today I was trumped." In Mississippi, the American Civil Liberties Union has filed a lawsuit accusing the Madison County Sheriff's Department of imposing a permanent state of siege against the country's African-American residents. The lawsuit says the Sheriff's Department has maintained a series of roadblocks and checkpoints in majority black neighborhoods where African-American residents are subjected to illegal searches. The suit represents 10 black residents in the county, including Quinetta Manning, whose husband was attacked and beaten by sheriff's deputy officers and who says, quote, "I am scared all the time that the Sheriff's Department will hurt me or family," unquote. And in Texas, the family of 15-year-old Jordan Edwards has sued the Balch Springs Police Department over the murder of their son. Police body cam video shows police officer Roy Oliver fired his assault rifle into a car carrying 5 black teenagers as they drove away from the officer. One of the car's passengers says the officer never even ordered the boys to stop driving before opening fire. Oliver has been fired from the police department and charged with murder. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman, back in New York.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. So welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.